Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, allow me to welcome you to the Behavioral Exchange 2025 conference. Under the patronage of His Highness Sheikh Ziyad bin Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Behavioral Exchange BX 2025 is being held for the very first time in the Middle East, and more specifically in the UAE, positioning the country as a regional hub for applied behavioral science and a great contributor to the global behavioral science community. BX 2025 is hosted by the Behavioral Science Group, the Behavioral Insights team, and the Center for Behavioral Institutional Design at NYU Abu Dhabi. The importance of embedding behavioral science into policies, systems, and societies is immense. It empowers governments to design policies that align with the way people think, behave, and make decisions. The Behavioral Science Group, or the BSG, has been pioneering this work in the UAE. The BSG is a specialized team within the UAE government that applies behavioral science to deliver positive social impact in the UAE and beyond. They have worked alongside UAE entities to support the development and delivery of real-world solutions by designing, implementing, and testing innovative behavioral solutions across a range of policy areas. I would like to showcase this importance by sharing a few results from the BSG. In the food waste reduction space, pilots during Ramadan led to a 12 to 15% reduction in food waste in hotels, which, when scaled to 220 hotels across the UAE, saved over 15 tons of food waste in just 5 weeks. In the first national household energy trial in the UAE, 56,000 households in Abu Dhabi were sent behaviorally informed messages, reducing energy consumption amongst the highest consumers. And overconsumption research by the group found that 97% of people are willing to reduce their consumption if others do the same, and naturally shaping national discourse. So many more examples can be given about how human behavior and people-centered solutions are key to tackling some of the world's most complex issues, from climate change to health to digital transformation and education. And during BX 2025, we will be hearing from over 50 experts and 500 delegates about how behavioral science can drive innovation, resilience, and evidence-based policymaking in the MENA region and beyond. And now please allow me to introduce our honored guest speaker who will be giving our opening remarks, Her Excellency Shamma Al-Mazrui, the UAE's Minister of Community Empowerment.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, pioneers of behavioral science, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's not every day that the world's leading minds gather to talk about how small shifts, defaults, choices, frames can move entire systems. But if there's a place for this conversation, it's here in Abu Dhabi. And this moment exists because of His Highness Sheikh Ziyad bin Mohammed bin Zayed, who sees behavioral science not as a side project, but as a serious lever for national building. And the UAE Behavioral Science Group hasn't just applied insights, it's reshaped how behavioral science evolves in a world that is changing faster than our assumptions can keep up. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you struggled with something? Like, really struggled? Not I can't find the TV remote kind of struggle, or the Wi-Fi is too slow kind of struggle. I mean the kind of struggle that makes you rethink everything. Rethink your habits, your beliefs, your limits, and forces you to grow. And here's something that we don't say enough. Struggle is not the enemy. It's the architect of resilience. Because I want you to know, and maybe some of you are thinking, isn't this a behavioral science conference? Aren't we here to make choices easier, not harder? Yes and no. For years, we've focused on removing friction, making good choices effortless. But what happens when the scaffolding disappears? What happens when the nudge fades, when the world shifts, when no one is nudging you anymore? We've spent the last decade learning how to make choices easier. Now, we must learn how to make people stronger. And this is where the next great frontier of behavioral science lies, not in making choices easier, not in removing friction, but in doing something far more powerful, helping people build the muscle to navigate life even when no one is guiding them. And in essence, it's about shaping stronger people, not through control, but through capacity. And I love the word capacity. A very dear professor, Ron Hivitz, introduced me to the concept of adaptive capacity, which is the ability to adjust, adapt, and thrive in the face of uncertainty, especially when rules change, when nudges disappear, and when there's no more defaults. But adaptive capacity is not about bouncing back. It's about growing forward, even when the path is unclear and the guideposts are gone. So it's what basically turns short-term behavior into long-term capability. Not just helping people have or follow better habits. Adaptive capacity is about giving them the ability and helping them to build their own habits, even when the system isn't there to help them. So basically, it's a shift from being guided to being your own guide. And that's the distinction between nudging and adaptation. Because sometimes we design an intervention and it looks like it works until we stop watching. So let me tell you a small story with the problem with only nudging. A university wanted students to take the stairs instead of escalators. So they nudged them. They put up posters. They even put about the health benefits of taking the stairs. They painted motivational signs. They even installed, the cute piano stairs that played music with each step. And guess what? It worked for 1 month. And then the novelty wore off, and people went back to the escalator. Why? Because the nudge was fun, but it did not create a habit. It did not change their mindset. It did not change their identity. It made the choice easier, yes, but it didn't make them stronger. There was no long-term character change. So that's the trade-off. A nudge that simplifies can spark behavior, but it does not build capacity. It creates dependency. If the behavior disappears when the nudge disappears, did we ever really change anything? We removed the friction, but we also removed responsibility. Because if all that we've done is steer the choice without strengthening the chooser, we haven't built resilience. We've built reliance. And in a world that is growing unpredictable every single day, that's not just a design flaw, it's a huge risk. But okay, let me be clear. Building capacity does not mean walking away and abandoning people. Support still matters, design still matters, nudging still matters, because the opposite extreme of leaving people to figure it out on their own, no design, no nudge, no guidance, is just as flawed. You can't remove the scaffolding before people are ready to stand. And so this brings me to the problem with only adaptation. Take personal finance. For years, we've believed and assumed if you taught people how to budget, how to save, how to invest, they'd make smart financial decisions. They did not. Not because they weren't smart, but because knowledge or information isn't transformation. People are overwhelmed. They procrastinated. They avoided hard decisions. So you can throw someone into the deep and tell them to swim, tell them, or inform them, but that doesn't mean they will float. So where does this leave us? What is the next frontier of behavioral science? It's somewhere in between, where nudging meets adaptation, where the best intervention doesn't just steer choices. They shape the kind of person who continues to make those choices long after the prompt is gone, long after the nudge fades. Because the real power of a nudge isn't what it gets someone to do once. It's who it helps them become. And let me show you what I mean. It's not enough to nudge someone to open a savings account. We must help them see themselves as someone who plans ahead, as someone who believes in the discipline and the dignity of financial foresight, in the power of saving. It's not enough to get someone to recycle once. We must foster the identity of a steward that outlasts the sustainability campaign, someone who protects the planet even when it's inconvenient, not just habit, but meaning. It's not enough to nudge my son to eat a healthy meal. I must help him internalize health as a part of who he is, as someone who fuels his body with care, and he does it even when no one's watching. Because when the nudge builds adaptive capacity, it leads to a shift in identity. And then, that's what happens. The behavior doesn't just change, so you get their behavioral change, but the behavior lasts. So the best nudges don't just smooth the path, they build the legs that walk it. The best nudges build adaptive capacity because they build decision makers. They don't just change choices. So when a nudge teaches, when it shifts and changes the way someone sees themselves, and when the effect lives long after the program is gone, that's when we moved from behavioral change to identity shift. So the best interventions do three things. They teach something, they change and shift how someone sees themselves, and they last longer than after we've left the room. That's what makes behavior stick. That's what changes influence into transformation. So when nudging marries adaptation, we don't just shape behavioral, we shape character. And that's the moment when behavioral science becomes something more, not just a tool for design, but it can become a force for human development. So here's the real shift that we all need to make. Not in shaping action in the moment, but building capacity for a lifetime, capacity to make wise decisions. And the real question is no longer what behavior did we shift? It's what kind of person did we help shape? Because in a world that we're in, that is constantly changing, and in the world that is coming, the scaffolding will disappear, the defaults will fade, and the world will ask more of us than ever before. And in that world, the nudges that teach will be more powerful than the nudges that trigger. And behavioral science that shapes identity will last longer than science that nudges choice. Because surface behavioral change might look impressive, but only identity-driven action stands the test of time. And maybe Dr. Michael Halsworth is with us here today, and he'll remind us, he'll say the question isn't just to ask, did it work? It's why did it work? For whom? And did it build identity, or did it just prompt behavior? And what does it teach us about what must come next? And if we can answer that, we won't just refine behavioral science. I think we will all be able to redefine its purpose. And this isn't just about clever tweaks in design. It's a foundational shift in direction, because the most meaningful change isn't what we do to people. It's what we build within them. And design matters. Yes, it's not enough. But the real power, again, is about what remains when the design disappears. So the legacy of behavioral science is going to be stronger people, not smarter defaults. It's more capable people. And the real measure of behavioral science or this field's success is not just how many habits we've sparked, it's how many humans we've strengthened. Not how many choices we've shaped, but how many people we equipped to choose wisely when no one is watching. And we're not here to shape behavioral alone. We're here to build societies and communities that are resilient, that are reflective, that are ready, that are more capable, that are able to stand stronger when the ground shifts. Because the future won't belong to those with the best design paths. It'll belong to those who know how to build one when none of these paths exist. And the long-term game isn't about getting our people to follow the best prompt. It's about building people who can function and thrive and lead. And those who have internalized the tools and principles, because internalization is the outcome of adaptive capacity. And because behavior only lasts when it aligns with who we believe we are and what we believe matters. And the future will be built by those who turned behavior into character, nudges into identity, and habits into who they are. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that inspiring speech and a look into the UAE's views on behavioral science. Very inspiring. Thank you very much, Shamma and Mazrui. Now, please allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to call to the stage Professor David Halpern, the President Emeritus of the Behavioral Insights Team, which is an official partner of BX2025. Please give him a hand.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. Look how many people. BX25. Well, thank you to Your Highness, Your Excellencies, and many honored guests and friends. Just make some brief remarks, really, about friendship, some fundamentals, and maybe the frontiers, which we're all gathering to talk about. For those who don't know the background of the Behavioural Exchange sort of event and format, it came from more than a decade ago when a number of us were working in governments, me in Downing Street, Kath in White House, and so on, and some of the conversations we were having with the likes, particularly of Richard Thaler, and how could we bring together the very best of academic thinking. Many academics were meeting in conferences in lots of places, but without policymakers, and policymakers met somewhere else. Why couldn't we bring them together in this wonderful way? And that was the idea of behavioural exchange. Now, since then, it's moved around the world. In fact, originally it was New South Wales, and I'm really delighted we have Victor Dominello from New South Wales, where it sort of started more than a decade ago. It's moved between continents. We had it in Europe and London, who was in the US at Harvard, and rightly and properly, of course, I should say in Asia, in Singapore, let me not forget, and now here in the Middle East, hosted by Abu Dhabi. What better place, really, to try and bring together those kinds of challenges? You know, we would say to our young researchers, you know, you might have had a choice. Do you become a great scholar and professor at NYU, or are you going to go into government and be a great policymaker, or will you become a social entrepreneur? And actually, what we really want to do is bring those kind of three traditions together, and that's what I think we've got in the room for the next 2 days. So fantastic to be with you and see old friends and new faces too. Great also to be specifically in Abu Dhabi and working with the BSG, which is doing incredible work and really pushing frontiers itself with respect to a whole range of domains, and a government which is clearly impatient about how can we harness behavioral understanding, but technology and so on, in order to kind of push forward and make the future. And in the world, surely we need more of that, not less. On core, you know, sort of foundations, I mean, before we move to frontiers, I think the fundamentals haven't changed, right? And as far as that lesson which we've learned, and we were surely reminded through COVID as well, which is that most of the great challenges we face involve human behavior, right? Be it climate change or with respect to health behaviors across the world, that so much of it increasingly is about lifestyle, about economic growth, and a growth in a world where productivity is stalled in many nations. Huge chunks of that are about human behavior. That was true 15 years ago. It is certainly still true today. So much more to do. But on the other hand, we also have kind of new frontiers too. I'm really excited. Actually, the main dilemma I find being here, many of you will, is there's so many really good sessions and you want to go to them all, but represent some of these key frontiers that we're confronting. So let me just mention a few before I move on. So one is the cross-national differences. If we go right back to some of the early work, we were all pondering, certainly in London, we didn't know as to whether lab studies in Harvard would actually be reproduced in, Hertfordshire and communities in Britain or Europe. I think we have a pretty good set of answers to that. But that continues in other regions and parts of the world. It's not enough just to take what comes from somewhere else, but actually, does it apply here? So some of the work and some of the sessions today on cross-national differences, which from Nikos, NYU, be absolutely fascinating to see, well, to what extent is it true? To what extent is a weird psychology not represented? To what extent do we have to adapt our knowledge and our applications as we understand the richness of humanity? A key issue also, and how appropriate that it's the year of community here in UAE, that one of the arguments about early behavioral science, including, we should acknowledge the fantastic great work of the likes of Danny Kahneman and Tversky, but it was quite focused on the cognitive, right? It was the sort of the rational decisions about stats and finance, and particularly as applied elsewhere. But so much of what concerns us is the flesh and blood of our lives, our connections with others. often for good, sometimes for bad, in terms of conflict or disagreements. Well, that too has to be part of our project in relation to behavioral science and showing a mirror back to who we are and giving choices back to citizens and indeed to communities and governments. So incredibly important to see that feature too. The economic challenges haven't gone away, but the last one, let me at least mention, which we weren't talking about 10, 15 years ago, is that AI, right? AI and BI are now completely or deeply fused in terms of their connections and the questions which we're asking. If I go back when I was a young undergraduate, it does seem a long time ago, I remember Tversky and Kahneman, this incredible work, reading it and thinking, wow, that's important. But alongside it at the same period, we had the early work on what's called parallel distributed processing models from Rumelhart, McClellan, Hinton, who of course recently himself got the Nobel. And that it was telling us something about cognition, that these emergent properties of networks would do things like we'd see in cognition. Now, fast forwarding nearly 40 years, I mean, it's incredible what we're now seeing with AI models. And in fact, in some ways, not only the practical implications of what it is, we now have humans to explain and understand, and we've got AI to understand and explain as well. So there are so many exciting frontiers. It is fantastic to be with you for the next 2 days, and I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, BX25.
Thank you, Professor David. I would now like to introduce Fabio Piano, the Vice Chancellor of NYU Abu Dhabi.
Assalamu alaikum. Wonderful to be here, and welcome to everyone to what is usually a room full of students. So perhaps you're today students. So I want to welcome Your Excellencies, Your Highness, Your Excellencies that are alumni of NYU Abu Dhabi, friends, colleagues, and general supporters of these institutions. Welcome. It's very exciting to be here and also open up your presence at a conference that I've already been inspired by just hearing the first two welcoming remarks. I am the Vice Chancellor here, which means that I'm responsible for continuing on a legacy that started long ago of what NYU Abu Dhabi should be. And I want to give you a little history of that, given that you're here. It really is a history that begins with a big question. And the big question is, what does the world need of a university for the next millennium? You know, universities are actually not the kinds of things that you set up and you have quarterly reports, though we do, but we have very long-term visions, very long-term capacity to actually inspire the next generations of scholars and of students. And as you may know, more than half of the institutions that are at least 500 years old, the way that they were established in the beginning, are universities. So they are very enduring institutions. And so we asked the question very earnestly, what does the world need in the future? And several of us, when we were in New York, debated this question ultimately for, honestly, more than 2 years before we came to Abu Dhabi. And we recognized that there were really two forces that we ought to focus on. The forces that were really globalization and technology, that were, in fact, changing the speed with which society was going to change in the future. And if you have such a speedy change of society in the future, what does it mean for developing the best people that can inhabit that society, that can shape that society, and that can help the world bring the kinds of forces also together for the future of humanity? So in the end, we decided that ultimately there are some fundamental things that we have to do, and they're actually quite traditional. The best university in the world, they're talent magnet. And so what we thought we should do here in Abu Dhabi is develop an institution that can be a magnet for all the best people we can find from the UAE, from Abu Dhabi, but also from the world. Once you have the best people to work together, let me tell you, they're not the easiest people to train because they all know better than you. And we absolutely actually like to debate with them every idea that they have. But we have, therefore, to find a way to guide that talent and develop that talent. And that's a high order, which means we have to bring the best scholars, the best faculty, the best teachers to be here to attract and develop that talent. And once you do that, you actually have to create a hub of knowledge creation, which is essentially another fundamental aspect of the best university of the world. They don't simply look at information, look at knowledge, look at what we know. And this is a great example of what a university does. It brings people from all over the spectrum of a big, important question, whether they're practitioners, scholars, government people, or even from the private sector. It all brings everything together for the biggest questions that we have to confront in society. And we joke internally that for us, becoming the best university in the world by the parameters of academic excellence is the low bar. Because in fact, what we aim to do is bring that capacity to a future generation of people that are so well trained, but equally trained to use that knowledge for a betterment of the world. So giving a moral compass, a direction for using that privilege that we can bring for doing good in the world. And I'm absolutely delighted that I have to follow Her Excellency Shamma Al-Mazrui, because she is the example of one of the early graduates of NYU Abu Dhabi, who in fact was one of the early Rhodes Scholars of this country out of NYU Abu Dhabi, and then became the youngest minister in the world when she came back to the UAE. And you know, I didn't want to embarrass her, but I did. I'm sorry about that. This is obviously an example that every university likes to give, but I will tell you, as she will remind us all the time, we now have so many Rhodes Scholars that in fact we're the highest institution in the world of Rhodes Scholars per student anywhere in the world. So I'm very excited about that. And that means that we bring students and scholars from all over the disciplines of what you think a university should build. So we have very deep roots in science, of course, social science included. We have very deep roots in engineering, and we have several major engineering programs. And of course, humanities and artistic fields that makes humanity worth living in some ways. And you are in one of our theaters, actually one of 3 theaters, to tell you how serious we are about each one of our disciplines. Because we believe that ultimately it's the holistic expression of what we are that will make us succeed. And I was inspired by Her Excellency's introduction for the remarks about what it means to actually not just simply be nudged, but actually to reinvent yourself or be able to reinvent yourself. So ultimately, that's what we do. In fact, I think we are an example of the product of what that should do, but without having studied it explicitly that way. But that means we also have a very deep research mission, because knowledge creation is absolutely necessary to move forward. And in fact, we're very excited and very happy that among our faculty that we can bring the best in the world. They are the most honored people in their fields. We have even 3 Nobel laureates that are full-time at NYU Abu Dhabi, and 2 others that are coming here to teach and do research with various colleagues. But we span the systems that we are excited about, and this country is excited about. We have a deep research projects and centers around space systems and astrophysics. We talk about communication and chip design, and particularly in cybersecurity, we've developed what is being dubbed the unhackable chip. Every time I say it, the engineers get nervous because they have a world record on not being hacked, and it's 3 years, as far as I can tell, maybe even more. And the earlier version was 2 weeks. That was the previous record. We have a lot of environmental work that, in fact, uses the fact that we are a city by the sea, and uses the fact that the Gulf here is an extremely interesting and possibly unique example of how to understand the stressors of climate change, both in a marine environment, but also on coastal cities. And we can actually use it for the world to learn from. And my own field in genomics and systems biology, we initiated actually through the Healthy Future studies that some of you may know, the origin of the Emirati Genome Project that has now expanded incredibly beautifully with, of course, our partners at the time, G42. All of this using, of course, the latest technological advancements, in particular with AI, and having a very big play in large language models using Arabic language. and some of the leading scholars here. So very excited for you to be here, for you to experience this at a university that in fact believes that multidisciplinary work is the way forward. You are talking about applying human behavior in a way that can actually improve the way that we even design institutions. And so my final example is the example that is here at NYU Abu Dhabi, CBID, the Center for Behavioral Institutional Design, which was established years ago, and in fact is one of the centers that has had a lot of connections with partners here in the UAE and Abu Dhabi, and I want to really thank that partnership, which has really made it possible for us to continue and expand that, and I'm looking forward to much more in the future. So as you explore the incredible ideas that are going to come from this conference, the excitement of this debating how to move forward in terms of making sure that human behavior is centered to the way that we think about the future of a joyful life and a joyful future for the rest of the world, I hope you get a chance to look around. You are at an institution that was built to do exactly that. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor, for these very insights into the university, and very interesting to know that Her Excellency is an alumni of NYU Abu Dhabi. So thanks again for that.